Welcome to Cabin Fever, a podcast by Offsite. I'm your host, Brian Vallario, and I'll be talking to makers, founders, and creatives about the things they're building. We're kicking off the podcast with Joe Hollier, co-founder of the Light Phone. If you're not familiar, the Light Phone is a phone designed to be used as little as possible. It's also extremely beautiful. Their latest model, the Light Phone 3, just became available for pre-order, and I wanted to sit down with Joe to talk about his extremely unique approach to product design. I think you'll really enjoy our conversation. Welcome, Joe. Thanks for joining us. Joe is the co-founder of Light Phone. And I just want to hear, let's start from the beginning. Where are you from? What's your origin story, background?
Yeah, so my name's Joe Hollier. I was born in New Jersey, pretty close to New York City, and grew up as a skateboarder, which is sort of what introduced me to all things art, from photo, video, to even, screen printing, and later even like web design, and, trying to make little skate videos. And then from that kind of experience, I realized that's what I wanted to study in college. So I went to the School of Visual Arts here in Manhattan. And I've been living in Brooklyn in this loft basically ever since going to school. After school, I graduated as a graphic designer, and I sort of worked as a freelance artist between both video as well as sort of like illustration and whatnot. And in 2014, a few years after graduation, I was invited to this Google incubator program for designers. It was very open-ended, and it really posed the question that what kind of companies would designers create if they were at the founding table rather than seen as a kind of afterthought, and that design shouldn't be just this ribbon that you put on after the product is sort of engineered and the MBAs have their business plan, but that designers think holistically and fundamentally different than everyone else, and that they might solve different problems with more empathy and likewise. So, I joined this program, very open-ended, and it was in this program that I met my business partner, Kaiwei, and we started what would become the Light Phone.
Yeah, that's awesome. I didn't know you're from Jersey. I'm also from Jersey.
Yeah, I'm a little reluctant to admit it sometimes, but born and raised Jersey, can't get away from it.
Yeah, likewise, same. I lived there until high school, and then I moved up to Vermont. And I think, the only time I say I'm from Jersey is if someone else is from Jersey. But no, that's awesome. I want to dive in. I also grew up, and this is how we know each other, so I'm not surprised, but I also grew up in the skateboard, snowboard culture. I think, I feel like, especially, this may be changing, but I feel like from our generation, early 90s, 2000s, it really was still a bit of a subculture, and there were so many people doing interesting things in terms of art and creativity, but also building brands and building businesses, and there was money flowing into that industry as it grew. Do you see and look back at your time kind of in the skateboard industry world, just culture as a defining piece of what shaped kind of your thoughts on design and building businesses?
Yeah, I think there's this attitude of do it yourself that I've just sort of never strayed away from. I've never had a traditional job. I've always just kind of, whether it was freelance and, kind of working for a client, which is different than running a business, but it was still very much I'm going to do the type of work that I want to do. And, somehow, some way we'll figure out how we, keep the lights on and pay rent and whatnot. So I think that mentality of do it yourself, I can do anything, I didn't say I need to go to school to learn how to make skateboards. I was just
yeah.
What's this program called? I can figure it out. I'm going to make skateboards. And I think, a lot of skateboarders learn really technical things when it comes to cameras, building ramps,
totally.
And all these other things that we seem second nature to them, but other people might assume they had to learn. And I think that attitude translates, the fact that I thought I could make a phone as a designer and somehow have relatively pulled it off, speaks to that kind of just how hard can it be? We'll figure it out. you know? And so I think that would probably be the essence that I feel the most related to. And it translates not just into businesses, but like, look at that bookshelf. Like, I could
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
make something like that. And yeah, maybe it's not as, masterly woodworked, but I'm like, it holds my books. It looks kind of cool. And I
Yeah,
can
no,
remix it if I
totally.
want.
Yeah. No, I think that's such a good point. And yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely you see so many people that have gone into like film or photography from it because I think you're just so often around cameras and it's an easy transition. But you're right, like the DIY mentality is so built into that culture. I also think something I've always like thought about is like you end up just looking at the world in a very opportunistic way. Like everything becomes something that it was not intended to be used for, whether it's like handrail, stair set, like, banks. Like I ended up going into architecture and I think like looking at the world through that lens of just like what are the opportunities I can do with this thing that it is not in, traditionally meant to be used for was something that was, I don't know, really beneficial to me in my early days designing of just taking an approach. I do think the DIY thing, like, I agree. I feel like, and I'm curious your thought on this, like, if you have any stories, like, it's gotten me into trouble sometimes as well as I've gotten into more like technical endeavors of just like, oh yeah, I'll figure it out. Like, how hard can it be? Whether it's like things with the business, but also around the house. Like, I think at this point, my wife would be like, do not touch that. Like, call the plumber. Like, yes, I will figure it out, but it's like it's going to be a rough 48 hours. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, it's a double-edged sword. I mean, even at points of the light phone, have come to terms with my own, limitations in certain ways. And but I guess the other side is that skateboarders learn a crazy resilience, and the payoff for skateboarding, at least for the vast majority of skateboarders, isn't financially tied. It's really usually for the love of it for oneself and maybe for a small group of friends cheering them on. There's no like crazy carrot at the end other than you did it for yourself and proved that you could. So I feel like, yeah, the combination of those definitely can lead to a really interesting or perhaps explosive result.
yeah,
I
yeah.
do like that what you said about optimistically looking at the world, though. I definitely know what you mean, like, going on trips with my parents as a kid and like taking pictures of stair sets and not
Yeah, yeah,
actually of like the jungle or whatever
yeah,
thing we were visiting. And then I would say that, like, as I got further into art, photography, you start to see the world less literally and more as compositions. And then typography I got really into, and then you start to notice every sign and every letter and all the kerning and
yeah,
different design decisions. And so sometimes I walk down the street and I'm like, I'm probably looking and thinking at the world in such a specific to me way that, like, I'm almost not looking at the same street as this bystander or, like my parent next to me or something.
yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I think it gives a unique perspective, which is just yeah something I've noticed, and I think a lot of the designers that I've grown to look up to and kind of reference constantly, like tend to come from oftentimes, not always, of course, but like from some board sports background, and I think there's just something built into that, and it's probably self-referential as well, right? Like that's just like the culture that I grew up in. I know it. I'm drawn to it. But yeah, I think there's definitely something there. You touched lightly on like the origin story of Light Phone. I first became aware of it and what you guys were doing. Definitely want you to talk more in detail about what Light Phone is. But I was at a bar, Matchless, I believe, rest in peace.
RIP.
And Brian Kelly, a mutual friend of ours, pulled the original version 1 out of his wallet. And I was just like, what is that thing? That is so cool. And yeah, he like explained to me, this is before you and I met. Yeah, for those of you that don't know, version 1 was like basically credit card sized. And yeah, I mean, I'll let you explain it, but I'd really love to like, yeah, kind of hear the early inspiration and thought process behind that. And then you guys just launched version 3 for pre-sale, which congrats, it's awesome.
Thank you.
So
Yeah.
excited to get my hands on one and try it out. And there's a lot of new features and kind of like added utility to it. So I'd love you to just like walk us through V1, V2, V3, and like, that evolution of light phone.
Totally. And so, yeah, I guess stepping back in 2014, we joined this program, and it was very open ended. And we learned really quickly that they wanted us to make smartphone apps. That was really where the software and our technology world was moving. And we met so many founders of all these different companies, investors, thought leaders, and we saw a lot of trends really sort of obviously across the board. And one was that they had this golden metric of retention. And that was how much time does a user spend on your product? Because if you made, a website or an app that was sticky, that someone kept checking and checking, there was, all sorts of money to be made, collecting data and selling advertising. And I think this is sort of known now, but in 2014, this felt like a sort of wake up call of, wow, if every single product is fighting more and more aggressively for my time and attention, how is that possibly going to align with my quality of life personally when I'm feeling, even back then, habitually overwhelmed? I was freelance. I didn't like seeing an email when I went to change my song at the beach. It's just kind of already feeling like, why am I bringing my whole work life via, my little iPhone, as well as my personal life with me 24/7. It was really hard to have online and offline. And I also thought back to like AOL Instant Messenger and my first experience with the internet, which was very clearly like online or offline. Like the divide was very obvious. I only had one chair and my dad studied with the internet. And when I left that chair, I essentially left the internet. And so I put up an away message or something of the likes. And I kind of missed that distinction. Ever since I got a smartphone, I might check my email before I get up and brush my teeth. It wasn't so obvious the online and offline time. And so the origin of the light phone was really about seeing if people would enjoy intentionally, consciously taking breaks from the internet. Putting up this away message, taking, at the time we just had flip phones we were testing with very limited contacts, and trying that for an evening or for a weekend, and their calls would forward to it. So God forbid there was an emergency, they were still reachable, but it would give them this peace of mind that they're essentially disconnected for some period of time, but not, off the grid forever. It's not like they cut the cord and, left forever. And what we saw really, really early on was that this was working quite well. People were feeling so relaxed, relieved, productive from just a couple of hours away from the internet regularly in their life. And that kind of brought us to the design philosophy for the light phone, which was designed to be used as little as possible. Because what we realized was no one actually used the flip phones. They were really serving the purpose of peace of mind that, God forbid, someone called in an emergency or they needed to call one of their loved ones, they were reachable. But actually the whole value of the experience was that the phone didn't do anything. And the more the phone did and asked you to maybe do with it, the less, free you would be from these things. So the original light phone was limited to 9 speed dials, only phone calls, and it sort of, worked with your smartphone as a sort of, away message, to use that metaphor again. And we called this experience going light. And you could go light for a weekend, for a whole week, whatever it was for you, but it wasn't really replacing one's smartphone.
Gotcha.
We launched it with a Kickstarter campaign, being really small. The production process was ambitious, and we had to really, fight to raise all of the money to pull off all the R&D and get the phone made. But in 2017, we began shipping that model, the original light phone. I think there was, some people with the light phone, like a gym membership, you aspire to have a more balanced relationship, but it's hard to actually do day in and out. And then other people, were finding themselves liking the light phone so much that they didn't want to go back to a smartphone. And, there's many anecdotes I could share about specific users, but we really felt like adding a few more utilitarian features would make it easier for more people to use the phone longer, and for some people to completely replace their smartphone. And these things were like a full contact book, text messaging, and maybe an alarm. And then, we've come to build what is now known as the Light OS, which is a suite of these kind of utilitarian tools. We now have a calendar, timer, directions, a simple music player, voice memos, some of the like core features of a smartphone, but done in a very intentional and privacy oriented way. And so that was the Light Phone 2. It was really small, just barely bigger than a credit card, and it used an e-ink screen, which is like that Kindle paper screen.
Right. Yeah, like the matte black and white. Yeah.
So it's, a little bit slower. It's never going to do video or images or any of these things. But, for the users that were able to adopt it and use it full time, it became a pretty profound lifestyle change. And we've been supporting the Light Phone 2 for about 5.5 years now, with these ongoing updates, adding new features with time. And, new features isn't necessarily saying like, well, isn't it going to be a smartphone? It's like basic things like voice to text or spell check or alternative characters for international users, things that, really just make it easier to use, but not things that you'd ever find yourself checking or rechecking.
Right.
And then just this last year, we introduced the Light Phone 3, which, goes even further on the utilitarian aspect. It's not necessarily reinventing the wheel. It's going to use the same Light OS, but it's a slightly bigger form factor. The small phone was too small for some people to see or use physically. It brings more premium materials. It's all metal. It's has more international compatibility for people that are traveling, and it's really just meant to be a truly professional, minimal phone. And so it's, doesn't use the e-ink screen. And then I would say the one new feature is that it does have a camera. But other than really the camera, it's the same Light Phone in a different, faster, and slightly bigger form factor. And the idea is that we are going to continue to sell both of these side by side, because some people, maybe you're buying for a kid and you don't want the camera or all this noise, or they don't need all of that speed. The Light Phone 2 might be perfect, or if you're using it just as a sort of weekend phone. But for some people that want to replace their flagship iPhone, maybe the Light Phone 3 is the more superior comparable, replacement.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's really cool to hear kind of like the evolution of it from, kind of nine speed dials to where it's at now with version 3. I will say, like, I personally feel like I am, like, version 3 is like gonna be the one that really like converts me to go like full light. I think like with work and just like we just had a kid, so I am like, yeah, thank you. So much fun, but I am rapidly running out of like iCloud storage on my phone because the amount of photos I take now is just absurd, and like wanting to document and share with family. And so I think like that phone number 3, I'm looking at the specs on and being like, oh, okay, I can do this. Like, and I feel myself more and more wanting that removal of like just so many, like you do just feel like you're just being constantly like, and we all know this at this point. It says like, yeah, oh man, I'm just doom scrolling. Like I've got to get off this phone. It's amazing. It honestly is amazing how addictive all of these things are. But I think it's really interesting. And like, I think you guys are spot on. And like, the problem is not technology, like by any means. And adding tools into the phone is simply adding tools that are helpful and beneficial for you in life. It is really this kind of like these attention stealing techniques that are being used like in the apps and in social media. And I think I'm hesitant on some of the stuff. I think that we're always a little bit scared. Like, we heard this with television and radio and, books when they first came out, but like that, I think there is something to be said, like social media, and again, like as a dad, I'm like very worried about raising a kid in this environment and like what that is going to look like in another, 10, 13 years. So I'm interested, I guess, in your, you spend a lot of time kind of thinking about these problems and how to address them in a really thoughtful, sensitive way. So like, what do you think? I think we all know where we're at. There's been like starting to be a pretty heavy reckoning with social media and, phone usage, like where do you think we're headed culturally, like in terms of technology? Where do you see things moving?
I mean, they've pretty steadily moved in one direction since I started really studying this with the light phone back in 2014. And I don't necessarily know if that's the direction that everyone wants to be going, but it doesn't seem like Apple, the Metas, all these other platforms, TikTok, are really trying to change course. And so a lot of times when I think about, where we're going with technology, I often look at the individual, because I think, as you've kind of pointed out, like so many people are feeling the pressures of these things, whether it's clickbait news or online shopping or social media or dating apps or Reddit holes or these kind of infinite things that are so good, but also inherently, because of their business model, they're not encouraged to actually make any meaningful changes. And I think until the business model is radically different than it currently is, we're not going to see any of the kind of drastic changes that maybe culturally we all agree might be necessary. But I think what's amazing is that whether it's a light phone or any other number of phones or no phone or stripping down your existing phone, I think as consumers and as individuals, we have the agency to start to carve out, the life that we want and that makes the most sense for us. And I don't think it's a one size fits all. And I think with the light phone, we're always thinking about how do we eliminate unnecessary friction, but also very aware that there's going to be inevitable friction. The light phone doesn't have QR code scanning and this and that. And over the pandemic, that added some friction in my and many users' lives. Was it unbearable? No, not really. I mean, in a weird way, I kind of almost feel empowered to be the anti fully moving to this digital world.
Yeah.
But each year, more things do move digitally, and the light phone is constantly kind of trying to not catch up, but to manage where and how we move along that. But we're always going to be behind, a huge player like Apple in terms of these moves. So I think, I would love to see more options be born, more niche products, more things that are designed for a very specific user. I think that's why like a company like Teenage Engineering we were chatting about before is interesting to me, is because they make what seem like very genuinely fun products. And I don't think they think that every single person in the world is going to buy their product, but they're aware of that and they're making products with a specific person in mind, and they can make them a real delight for that user, where the iPhone tries to be everything for everyone, and in a weird design sense that's almost undesigned.
Yeah, totally. I was thinking about this the other day. There are like very few things that have mass market appeal that are like generally good for people. Like I think, whether it's food and you're looking at like McDonald's or, Meta or, name any large tech company that has like a massive global base, I think fashion as well, like just it's very, very hard, I think, I was trying to think of a company that I think is, operating at that massive scale and doing things really well, and like benefiting society at large. I'm very interested to find one. But I think you're absolutely right. Like it's these niche companies who are just like really thoughtfully thinking through specific problems for specific people, because I think not everyone has the same needs the same solution for any given problem, is really like super interesting. And I think like to what you're saying, yeah, light phone definitely moves slower than a lot of probably the other phone manufacturers out there. But there's a lot of benefit to that as well. Like, I think in that, like, a lot of this stuff is just, a dumpster fire when it comes out, or 10 years down the road, we realize, oh, wow, this is maybe messing our kids up pretty severely. So I think there's like something to be slow and methodical and thoughtful, and like being able to be that company as well is something that I look up to you guys for. And I think that probably most of your customer base like appreciates that it's not like jumping on whatever's possible at the moment, but really waiting to see how how it might affect people and your customers.
Yeah. And I think like, Light Phone's one manifestation of an alternate tech company, but I think even in a software sense, like what a different breed of social media companies look like that maybe charge a fair
Totally.
price and it's not offset by insane amount of surveillance and attention economy tactics,
Yeah.
and instead it's actually just to like help you share your kids' photos to the few dozen people that are really close to you that want to see them regularly, where Instagram might be the platform many people choose, but that's not really the goal of that platform. It's got too many mixed matched goals to actually achieve any of them well. So when I think about the future, I'm obviously pushing to try to make the Light Phone one really tangible and feasible alternative to some of this stuff. I'm always like optimistic and encouraging other companies that might be on the prowl of solving it from a different angle. And so I'd like to imagine a future where people can create different companies. And I think if there's one great thing about the internet, the Light Phone wouldn't exist if it wasn't for a platform like Kickstarter, which used the internet to say, hey, this niche product that Apple, Samsung, Google, Nokia are never, ever, ever going to make, we actually think there's enough people out there. And, we proved it on Kickstarter, and then we're able to pull it off. And we've seen countless examples of other products come to be because of that. So, in a weird way, it's like using technology to create the new future.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, the internet's awesome. It's amazing. Technology is awesome and amazing. It's just like, yeah, unfortunately, there's been, probably some bad decisions and lack of oversight and regulation of some of these like larger companies. And we've ended up in a place that is, a little bit scary, I think, at the moment. Speaking of like other companies doing kind of really interesting things, I could be wrong on this. I don't know much about it, but from what I understand, you guys are part of Garden 3D, which is a bit of a collective of interesting companies. I don't know how involved you guys are with them, but if you are, like, would you mind like speaking on kind of like what that is? Because from what I see coming out of there, it's like I think one of the most interesting kind of groups and ideas coming out of like the technology sector at the moment. Yeah.
We do work heavily with one of their wings for our software team.
Cool.
So that's really our connection. And I will admit, like, I'm probably not the best spokesperson for the larger entity because they're so cool and vast.
Yeah.
But what I've always appreciated about them is that they tend to make amazing work across the spectrum of design, development, community sharing, community learning, as well as even like sustainability goals. And they can offer these services to a wide range of clients in a kind of piecemeal way that makes sense for them. And then they all sort of share a lot of shared resources, shared learning, shared spaces, and doing all of this pretty transparently along the way. And I think like the combination of all of those is really quite rare to see. And that's what inspires me as a designer that just like is always wanting to be a part of their events and meet other kind of like-minded people. But they're really hard to put in any sort of traditional bucket of what is it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely very difficult to define. I would recommend anyone listening look them up and go read some of their essays. Like, I think to me, like, the transparency that they put out in terms of, basically everything across the board, from how they pay to how they take on clients to their sustainability efforts, like across the board, they are like as transparent as I've ever seen any kind of group be. And it's super inspiring, and just a really cool way of kind of approaching business. And on top of that, just putting out awesome products and work
And
regularly.
they have wonderful benefits. From everything I've seen for their employees and heard, and so their retention seems to be great, and that's always to me a good sign of a healthy company.
Yeah, super cool stuff. I'm gonna shift gears a bit and get out of business world and just like, what do you learn about like what do you do outside of work? Like when you're not building phones and designing, like how do you balance that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one fortunate thing about doing the light phone is that we, practice what we preach. So we are really good at setting healthy boundaries for ourselves, but everyone that works for us.
Hmm.
And we're never really hitting you up after hours to check something or putting pressure on anyone to stress, because we know it's a marathon and not a sprint. So I'm fortunate that I do, aside from running this company, have a personal life outside of it. I've always identified as an artist, and I think one of the weirdest things about starting the Light Fund was that my fine art career got kind of put on pause, at least in terms of any public facing sense,
Hmm.
but I still work very regularly every week in the studio on collaging and painting. And I think one of the best things is that there's no financial ties to it anymore. Where
Yeah.
previously I'd be, stressing about how I could sell this and what this body means and when the money would come and when my rent's due. Now it's a lot more therapeutic and free of the ego, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
because I'm not getting this gratification of showing work, but I'm still very engaged in it. And it's funny because sometimes it's working through a painting that I think of a solution for something light found too. And it's funny how
Yeah. Yeah.
that
I mean, yeah.
crossover sort of works. Where sometimes I'm like, no, I gotta stay on the computer and just figure this out. But sometimes it's like stepping away from the computer is how I ground myself and get there. I'm a really big walker and a really big reader. And I think reading is really interesting because from our user base overall, that's one of the
Hmm.
biggest common denominators of things that, people go light and start doing a lot of. And I
Interesting.
think it's because, when you're given a blank piece of paper, like you go light and it's like, now what? At least a book, you're kind of reacting still. It's just like one feed and a lot
Yeah.
slower, like one voice on, usually about like one thing and a much deeper conversation, but it's still like you don't have to completely figure it out. And it's a nice way to sort of ease into that. And I think, walking is probably one of my absolute favorite things to do with a camera, with a friend, or just completely by myself.
Yeah. Same.
I get inspired. I take photos. It feels like a game sometimes, but also it's just, a stress relief and a great time to appreciate, being alive.
Yeah, we'll have to go on a walk sometime. That's definitely become like my biggest hobby these days. No, I totally. I mean, I want to talk a little bit more. I mean, I think you hit on something that like one, I very much admire you for picking back up the art and having something that is completely free of any sort of you know I don't know, financial transaction or like doing something like a hobby purely for yourself, just for the enjoyment of it. But also that like, going into that state and like going into that world of like, for lack of a better term, like play or like creating is often a time where you probably like solve problems for light as well, that that kind of like letting go of that allows you to. And like I want to touch on it because that's really like our whole thesis at Offsite, is that actually you can create environments that encourage kind of these big ideas to come through and make breakthroughs. And you can't force it, but we can definitely create environments that encourage it through nature, through good design, through allowing your mind to like be able to wander a bit. And there's tons of studies that show that just like going for a walk is one of the best ways to like spur creativity. And yeah, that's really essentially like what we're kind of building upon. But yeah, I think that I just wanted to like call that out, that I think that's super interesting, that becomes like a moment where that I'm sure not every single time, of course, but from time, that it
No, I
can be
believe
kind of
in it.
like yeah.
I mean, even like sometimes on an airplane or stuck on a long train ride, it's like getting out of your normal comfort zones. I mean, I think one thing I've had to get used to is like having employees, there's this pressure to be at your computer nine
Hmm.
to five or whenever we all are, but sometimes, I need to close the screen and not see the steady stream of email to actually like have the deep focus on
Yeah,
the thing I need. And I think there's this kind of like multitasking procrastination that happens sometimes when we have so much tech. Is like we
totally.
have like, maybe some people with multiple monitors. And I think in some ways, like, yeah, there's a huge amount of productivity that can get done that way, but there's also a lot of procrastination from, maybe some of the bigger problems that we need to address or solve. And so, it's always kind of a balancing act and a work in progress, but finding the ways that I work best. And I think one of my absolute favorite things about the Light phone is that there's no email on it. And
Yeah.
so my relationship to email lives solely on one computer. I actually have like a second computer for Joe outside of Light phone where my personal music and art and all that stuff lives, and I can't check a Light phone email if I want. And I think for me, I found that separating these things is really helpful to my brain. I can open the laptop and it's like, okay, here we are, Monday morning, 9
Yeah,
a.m.
that's
Let's
awesome.
check in and do what we have to do. And then at a certain point, you're like, okay, I've checked in. Now I need to brainstorm this thing. And I could keep checking the Slack and the email, but really what I need to do is sit down and
Sit down
plan
and work.
this bigger project. And the computer is not actually helping me achieve that in this moment. Once I have it sketched out, I can go on the computer, draw it out, and share it with the team. And that's where the computer comes in. So, like, knowing how to use your tools and not necessarily assuming that the computer is the only tool for me, I think is one thing I've also been like learning about my work habits. Because, if I was making an animation for a client, I wouldn't open my computer to brainstorm. I'd go on a walk, or I'd go to the library, I'd go to a bookstore, I'd go to the museum, I'd go somewhere even seemingly unrelated that might give me an idea.
Yeah, yeah, it's so true. I mean, I feel that so often that the computer is just like a hindrance in a lot of ways. I think coming from an architecture background, I was so used to kind of more of a studio environment where, yeah, it's like I worked through problems, drawing, building models, like, for most of the time just messing around until it like something clicked and you figured it out, and just playing. And the computer so often is such a rigid kind of tool to be able to like think through stuff. And yeah, I've also found myself resisting it a lot more. But it's tempting. It's like it's very easy to just hop on and like fire off some emails and go across
Feel
LinkedIn looking for
productive.
like yeah, and you feel like you're like I kind of did something, but not actually getting anything done. Have you ever done a work retreat before? Like, have you taken dedicated time to just go work on, some project or big problem?
Not so tangibly with the word work involved, but I've
Hmm.
definitely done retreats with other people at Light Phone where we kind of like didn't talk about day in and out Light Phone needs, but rather, you know, what's next, what's 5 years might look like, what's 10 years. And, I think naturally my role at Light Phone is very intertwined with the day-to-day and customer support and software side of things. So, giving myself the luxury of a retreat to step back and say, like, I'm not going to be on email for a week. And instead, we're still technically working, like, what else might that look like? And I think those things are incredibly important, but I've probably done more of those selfishly for my personal work. Like, I'm going to go to a cabin this weekend and work on a painting or, read these few books I've been meaning to read or something like that. But, everything's so connected that, reading this book, I have an idea for Light Phone and it sort of
Yeah,
comes back to
absolutely.
work. But I think for me, it's sometimes just taking myself out of my regular routines, dare I say, regular temptations, skate parks, friends at a
Yeah,
bar, concert that, oh my god, all the FOMOs of living in New York City. There's basically too many things to do at any given time, and just slowing down. And then obviously, nature is a huge creative inspiration for everyone, has been since forever. So I'm a believer in it. I can't say I'm doing it as much as I like, but I'm definitely one to crave a second home that I could never afford constantly. It's always in and out of my daydreams.
yeah. Well, we got to get you up to the cabin. I mean, it's so true, I think. And one of the things that we've kind of researched and looked at is like just switching up your environment is huge for like, you know, can be huge for productivity just because you're removing all of those kind of, yeah, cues and temptations that you would normally have at home, whether it's like, oh, I got to wash the dishes or I got to go, pick up the laundry. Like if you leave, then you just instantly erase all of those kind of back thoughts, desires. Like, yeah, you can't go hang out with friends. You have like no excuses. And you kind of put yourself in this situation where you're confront the work that needs to be done because there's really not much else to do. And it's, if you open yourself up to that, it's really amazing. So that's definitely interesting to hear that you have that experience as well. And yeah, I would love to get you up there, up to the cabin and give it a shot. Go work on a painting or, yeah, anything. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I got one last question for you, and it's just like, what are you excited about? What's coming up? What are you looking forward to?
I mean, I think in the light phone world, to bring it back, like we've been talking about this new light phone 3, and it is going to be starting to ship. I mean, our first production kicks off in January, and people will definitely start having the phones in their hands this February. So I think that's probably the thing I'm most excited about. I don't know if I'd usually answer this question with something work related.
No, but I mean, that's
But
like,
right now,
I mean, let's be realistic. Like, that's huge. It's like such a big thing that you've probably poured so many countless hours into.
yeah, and I think the whole team is feeling really great about this. The morale's high. There's a really great momentum across the board. We've grown a little bit since even announcing this. So the team feels really solid right now. Everyone seems really motivated on this one goal. It doesn't feel like a chore to be working on the light phone right now. It feels like the luckiest thing ever. And, every job has its waves of that. But, I'm just really grateful that we're having a third chance to try to, really nail it this time. And I think we have the best chance we have. And there's just culturally, the zeitgeist just feels more ripe than ever for a phone like ours to enter the world. We're constantly hearing from celebrities to random parents to schools to artists to just so many different people that totally resonate with what we're trying to do. And I think in a world that's so kind of divided on so many minuscule, almost pointless little divisions that, they carve us into, it's so cool and inspiring for me to be working on something that crosses a lot of those arbitrary lines, and I think would hopefully get us all in the real life together and realize that we all have way more in common than we realize. And if I wanted to go all mushy big, like that's the stuff that really does excite me. And so yeah, that's it for light phone. In my personal life, I've been skateboarding again. Not that anyone's going to be too excited by that, but we're filming a little video, and that's been keeping me really occupied on the weekends and sore through the week.
That's awesome. No, I'm so excited for you guys. Like, I'm super hyped for Light 3 to come out and to check it out. I do think, like, yeah, like, awesome timing. I'm really excited for you guys. I think you're right. Like, the moment just feels right for this product, like, at this time. So yeah, I'm really excited to see what happens with it and follow along. For everyone else, how can they get one? Where can they find you?
Thelightphone.com. Yeah, we're still really heavily internet presence, but I'm hoping sooner than later there's a ton of cool untraditional retail places I could point you to. But for now, the interwebs.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thanks, Joe. I appreciate you coming on so much. It was awesome talking to you. This was super fun.
For sure. Fun to catch up.
All right. Thanks, man. You can stay on. We'll cut it. But how'd you feel? Is there anything you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to that you want to jump back in?
I'm sure we could go on forever, but I wouldn't say I feel like anything's missing per se.
Cool. Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you, Ed. That was super fun. Yeah, I know. I could talk to you forever about this stuff. It's like...
But I think it's cool that naturally covered a lot of like the offsite overlap without even really trying to, just because I sort of believe that stuff already, and the light phone is so aligned with what you guys are doing too. So it's funny how like they kept having, I'm like, oh yeah, I guess that is exactly what I meant.
Yeah. I think like, by by design of just like what we're both kind of working on. They go so hand in hand. I think probably coming to a lot of the same conclusions or like finding the same stuff. The only question I had that I skipped over for the sake of time because I don't want to keep you past our hour, but
I mean, I'm not stressed on time today. If
right.
you wanted to try it again, I'm happy to.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, like, do you have any rituals that you do, like either for work or not for work, but like, do you have like rituals throughout your day or week, year, month?
Yeah, I definitely have things I regularly do. I've never been the most disciplined at having like a one drawing every day for 30 days, but I really, in my best days, I wake up, don't check a screen right away. I tend to put on some slow jazz in the background
Nice.
and read and write and maybe a mix of some piano if I'm not feeling like reading or writing. And I think those three things are kind of my like morning joy. And if I can have a little bit of that before embracing, the larger internet world and whatever may be happening with Light Phone, it really gives me a wider sense of being before just going straight into like I'm just here to execute these tasks like a robot kind of feeling that like life is so much bigger than just these tasks in this specific day. And then in the evening, I really really try. It's a little bit harder this time of year with the sun setting, but to catch the sunset on a walk. And sometimes in the winter, I have to catch up on work afterwards if I'm able to duck out. But I think that's been a steady ritual I've done for many years, even before the Light Phone. Is just like walking. I mean, maybe sometimes skating, but sometimes it's best to be alone for that for me and just really digest the past day, think about the future, not just tomorrow, but like, have I made any progress on these bigger things I'm talking about? And not like progress in some productivity way, but like that book you're working on. Are you showing it the love? Is it still existing in top of mind and whatnot? So I guess, walking in the evening and reading in the morning, those are probably like the two rituals that I've held the longest and that have done me the best.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think the starting your day off doing something that's solely for yourself is something that I've done and been like a huge believer in for a long time as well. And it's changed for me over the years. Like, there's so many wellness, productivity, like self-help kind of things in that sphere, but that's the one for me that just makes so much sense and is like genuinely beneficial, where like it allows you without a doubt to say, today I at least had this one good thing happen, and you do it right off the bat and you just like check it off. And yeah, that's like been such a powerful thing for me as well. Yeah, so that's super interesting to hear that you do that as well. Mine is these days way less cool than yours. I wish I did. Right now, it's just I make coffee and then I go lay in bed, get back in bed with my wife and son, and just like spend half an hour just like playing with him in bed, which is like so awesome.
But
It used to be
so
like,
amazing. And
yeah, it used to be read and write, but now it's just that.
there's days where maybe I had a few too many drinks the night
Yeah.
before and I don't get to the reading writing before work, and I notice a difference in the day. Your days
Yeah.
feel narrower and shallower, and I think it's great to expand before focusing in on what the day has and hold for you.
Totally. Do you do any sort of like, I know walking, but like, do you do like more intense physical activity ever? Is like that part of your routine, or rich? Do you like run or go to the gym or anything, or it's just like skating and walking?
I have a couple of little like exercise toys here, perfect push-up things
Yeah.
and ab roller and stuff. So I'll do like push-ups, sit-ups, stretches in the morning. But I'm a little intimidated by gym culture as much as I actually think I'd fall really crazy in love with it.
Yeah,
Maybe
I'm the
one day.
same. Yeah. Yeah, I'm the same. I've never had a gym membership. I've gone to like the trials a few times and I just walk in and I'm like, this is not for me. I'm better off in my room by myself.
But like I know single-handedly working on my core has helped my terrible
Totally.
back
Yeah.
posture issues I have
Oh
because
man.
I sit like this all day and I
Yeah.
can't seem to fix that. But at least if I keep myself tight in that way, I notice that I'm not just waking up like, oh, my back hurts. Although
Oh, dude.
sometimes I hurt myself reading. Like if I read in a weird position, uh, when you read a lot, that starts to happen
Yeah. No.
sometimes.
I get like crazy like shoulder cramps from reading because I'll like sit in the same position. Yoga to like that point, yoga has like changed my life, and I'm like, I am not a fan of like the. I don't go to yoga classes. I do not like the kind of like I don't know hippy dippy like like that type of stuff. But I just put on like YouTube yoga with Adriene every morning, and my back pains and neck pains have just basically completely disappeared, and they were like really severe for a little while from like work related stuff. And it's like, yeah, I'm like a full believer and just like I was like, oh
I
wow,
know I need to cross that
this really works.
one.
Yeah.
Maybe that's my push.
Yeah, and it's like I do the 15 to 20 minute workouts each day, and they're so mellow. But it's just it's not like it's a harder. I'm not like getting a six pack from it. It's just like the 10-minute stretching every morning, just like compounding interest, like really makes a big difference for me. Um, yeah, that's been like the most wild, I don't know, physical hack that I've found, I guess, for lack of a better term. But yeah, I'm a believer now. But yeah, I don't do the classes or anything like that. It's just that those are a little too much for me. Yeah. When is the launch again?
We're gonna start in February, so we'll probably have like a party in February. I'll definitely let you know in
Yeah,
case
please
you
do.
swing by the city or something. But and then like right now we've essentially sold out through April, so during that phase it'll be fun because the phone will be seating and we'll have exciting new
Yeah,
users and hopefully
that's
some
really cool.
press and influencers and we're trying to raise some money now, so like there's a chance that there may even be more resources for us to just make more and bigger things than we've ever been capable of before.
Yeah, that's
But
amazing.
not relying on that, I think it's still going to be really exciting.
Yeah, I feel like you guys are really hitting your stride, which is awesome. I'm excited for you.
10 years later, no, but we're still like so behind. It's so funny. It's like,
Yeah, but I mean, it's just like I'm a pretty big believer that like companies that end up lasting are built really slowly, like slowly and methodically, and like I don't know, especially in your world, like much more so in your world than mine, where like real estate just by nature is like super slow. It's like, it takes months to build a cabin. But in the tech world, like everything just feels like a pump and dump scheme to me. VC comes in, pump and dump this like app, they just sell it. The founding investors make a ton of money, and everyone else like is without a job in like 2 years. Um,
there is so much of that. And I mean,
yeah,
that's why it's like hard to even imagine small companies like Light because, you'll see some really cool app, like a calendar app that's done well, and then
yeah,
Apple buys them. The cool weather
yeah,
app,
yeah,
Apple buys them, and it's like, maybe that's good. Apple's weather got way better. But at the same time, it's like, there's no option but that.
yeah, yeah.
So like they slowly acqui-hire any competition. So it does feel harder and harder to have these kind of small independent companies. But uh, you know, I see kids from Stanford I'll talk to, and like they're so sharp, and they
Hmm.
just don't want to work for big tech or the military industrial complex.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, if my dumbass can figure out how to make a light phone company, like you guys can make a whole better future. And like take the risk, go for it, do it
Yeah, yeah.
yourself. Don't be succumb to their rules.
It's so
But
awesome.
that's like the skater attitude versus like a real scientist.
Yeah, I mean it's like I mean it's crazy that I don't know. I guess I find it I do and don't because it is so hard. Like what you guys have built is so hard to do, and you guys have put in so much work, and like especially without just like a massive influx of like funding or cash. But I'm kind of surprised that there's just not more, yeah, kind of like indie like pirate mentality tech startups like out there doing things. I'm sure there are like in the software and app space, and I'm just like not as in tune with them. But I don't know. I've always, like in the hardware space, obviously it requires a lot more money up front to build anything.
There's a couple. One I always reference, they're like sort of a part of the Garden 3D network, or at least that's how I met them, is Arena, ARE.NA.
But yeah, I use it all the time. I love it. It's awesome.
Like they're pretty small. I think it's like 3 developers, but the same thing, full transparency. They charge a price and they make a tool. They don't want your data. They're not trying to sell you ads. We're like just trying to use like Google Images is like Pinterest hell for me these days. It's like
it's a nightmare.
I can't even look at like a loft. I'm like, ooh, what would a kitchen loft look like? And there's just like nothing. So like that was one that I'm always like, they found a niche, they serve it, and I'm sure there's so many other ones in niches I don't know, like video games to otherwise.
Yeah, video games for sure has like a independent kind of developer culture for sure.
But like I haven't yet to see one for like artists sharing work and portfolios, and as a person outside of Lightphone, like that's what I'm missing on the internet is like I'm sitting on all this work. I'm not even trying to sell it or whatever, but like my friends don't see it and I don't know how to share it. Instagram just seems like the absolute worst vessel.
I would pay, a few dollars a month, absolutely, to have some sort of like social media that was not just a giant shopping mall. Like it makes me so mad. Like and it's like, I mean, we do it too. It's like, we run ads from time to time. We're like, obviously just trying to sell stuff on there through the company. But yeah, as a individual, I would love a place and be happy to pay for it. I was not just trying to be sold some like grift constantly. And like actually just, like, see what my friends post.
Depressing things or jealousy things. It's like, it's wild that like, I don't see a lot of my friends post. It's like,
you don't see it at all. It's like, you really got to go like search it out.
My friend was like, I think they shadow banned my wife from my page. He's like, I don't see any of her shit ever.
Yeah. No, seriously. It's wild.
You think they would have like figured out this is your wife.
Yeah. But it's like, it's the, they're not gonna, no one's gonna make money on that interactions. Who cares? Yeah. But it's pretty wild. Well, all that to say, always a huge fan of your guys' work. Super hyped to get the new phone. Thank you, man. This was awesome. Thanks so much for listening to my conversation with Joe. You can find the Lightphone at www.thelightphone.com and Offsite at www.offsite.camp. If you enjoyed, please subscribe, share with your friends, and support the brands and people doing good things out there. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.